Okay, in this video, I want to start talking about John Locke's second treatise on government, but actually, I want to start with giving some context on that and talking about the backdrop for it. So, let me begin by talking about liberalism. By liberalism, I don't mean the ideology of the political left in modern America. Rather, I mean the broad shared political framework that both so called liberals and conservatives share in common. Um, and I want to talk about two specific aspects of it that will be relevant for our discussion of Locke. First of all, liberalism, this shared framework, includes civil liberty. That is, a commitment to the rule of law, freedom from arbitrary treatment by the government. The idea here is that government officials can't just treat people however they want and and do whatever they want. They have to follow the laws. They have to enforce the laws. Their authority is bounded by law and not simply their own whims or wishes in the moment. The second aspect is political liberty, or what you might call popular sovereignty. And this is the idea that government authority doesn't come from the top down, but rather issues from the people and is given by the people to the government, and that therefore the government is responsible back to the people. These ideas might seem intuitive to us in the 21st century, but they have not always been so for everyone. There was a time before liberalism. And the relevant backdrop for our discussion is in England, Scotland, and Ireland. And in the 1600s, the Stuart monarchs, beginning with James I of England, his son Charles I, who's pictured here, his son Charles II, and then his other son James II, all of these monarchs pushed for a kind of divine right absolutism. What do I mean by that? Well, they conceived of their power as given to them not from the people, but directly by God. And therefore, they consider themselves not accountable to the people, but only accountable to God for what they did. So their vision was of a monarchy with no constitutional checks on their power whatsoever. Their rule was absolute. And that included they considered themselves more sovereign than the parliament. Consequently, they had a tendency towards imposing arbitrary taxation without the consent of parliament, arbitrary judicial procedures, and imposition of their own religious policies unilaterally, which over the course of the century tended more definitely towards Roman Catholicism, despite the fact that England itself was officially Protestant. So many things happen here over the course of these four reigns. It's a complicated story, but in short, these policies led to the so-called Wars of the Three Kingdoms, which ranged from 1637 to 1649, at which point the man pictured here, Charles I, was beheaded by Cromwell and some others. And then there was a period of the interregnum where England had no king, but instead was ruled by Cromwell and basically various variations of military government. And then Charles II was brought back during the Restoration period, and he ruled from 1661 to 1685. Now, this is where our story starts to zoom in on John Locke, who was around during this time, but the book that we're concerned with, its immediate context is 1688. What happens in 1688? The so-called Glorious Revolution occurred, and this is a very important event. What happened was that James II, who had come to power in 1685, had, among other things, had suspended English law. The law that he suspended was really the penal laws that barred non-Anglicans from public life and imposed upon them civil disabilities. Now, he suspended that law by issuing a declaration of indulgence, and so that granted de facto toleration to Roman Catholics and to nonconformist Protestants, like the heirs of the Puritans. Now, James II himself, and this is a very important fact, was a Roman Catholic. And so his action here was perceived not so much as a great love for toleration as such, but rather as a tactical move in his Catholicizing policy. where he was also installing fellow Roman Catholics into many positions of power in the military and in the government. And so one thing that Church of England officials, as well as nonconformists, could agree upon was that they did not want England to become Roman Catholic again. So they invited the Protestants, William and Mary, who were in the Netherlands, they invited them to come replace James II. James II fled, and Parliament declared William and Mary to be the king and queen in 1689. When they did so, they issued a declaration and Bill of Rights was of great historical importance. Now, why am I talking about all this? Who cares about the Glorious Revolution? Here's why this is important. The Glorious Revolution was widely viewed as establishing the authority of Parliament, that is, the authority of elected legislatures over monarchs, and as establishing the principle that those monarchs could be deposed if they ignored the laws of the land that had been passed by Parliament, which is what they perceived James II to have been doing. So that also the Revolution settlement solidified the balance of powers in the context of a limited constitutional monarchy as opposed to an absolute monarchy. Americans are apt to maybe not appreciate this as much as they ought, because Americans might tend to think all monarchy is oppressive, it's all tyrannical. Maybe so, but you need to appreciate the fact that there is a huge difference between an absolute monarch who says, my word is law, there is no higher power than me, and a constitutional monarch who basically functions like a lifelong executive branch of the government, not totally dissimilar from a president, except without, terms. So there's a big difference there with a monarch who is bounded by the law and really shares authority with the elected representatives of the people and the legislature. So for these reasons, the Revolution settlement became the paradigm of political liberty in the 18th century and the Enlightenment period. People all over Europe, including in France, looked at the British Constitution as the gold standard of freedom. That wasn't the kind of thing that anybody else had. And so people from Voltaire to Montesquieu, as well as all the American founding fathers, all their notions of political liberty were deeply impacted by the Revolution settlement and what they took it to represent. Again, you might be asking yourself, who cares? Sasser, don't you teach philosophy, not history? Yes, I teach the history of philosophy. Now, here's how this is relevant to John Locke. There's Locke. Locke's second treatise of government came out in 1690. So this is in the immediate aftermath of the Glorious Revolution. Now, it had been composed, at least in part, quite a long while before the Revolution. But this is when it was published, and it was viewed and interpreted as a philosophical defense of the Glorious Revolution and acquired great significance for that reason. And I want to focus in on a couple aspects of the second treatise, which are especially relevant to the points I raised before, both about the rule of law and about popular sovereignty, because Locke wants to ground the authority of government in the consent of the people. That's a crucial liberal move. And the correlative of that is that he wants to provide a justification for resisting the government when it becomes tyrannical and oversteps its lawful boundaries. Both of those, you can see the direct relevance to the Glorious Revolution. So in my next video, I want to talk about the content of Locke's defense of these principles.